Hey guys, tonight we're going to do a midnight smoke on a Weber Smoky Mountain. I'm going to show you how to barbecue, and this smoker is fantastic to learn on and to compete with. We're going to make pork butts, and that's essentially pulled pork at the end. We're going to start outside here. Let me show you everything you need to smoke on a Weber Smoky Mountain. So the Weber Smoky Mountain is 3 sections: the bottom, the middle, and the top. The bottom has the fire, the middle has the racks for your food, and it also has a water pan to absorb all the energy from that very hot fire, and it also gives off a little bit of moisture. And then the top section with your thermostat and exhaust. All the things you're going to need are right here. Hardwood charcoal. No briquettes, I don't like to use those. It's too much ash. Long stainless steel wooden handled metal tongs. You may need to get in here and grab some of the burning charcoal and move it away from the inlets for the air. Some long oven mitts. Some fire starters. I like to use these wax fire starters. They're made by Weber. And I start the chimney over here, but I fill it over here so that any charcoal that falls through to the grates where the fire is going to be. I use wood chunks, not chips, and I don't wet this. Wood doesn't absorb water, and that would just mess things up anyway. Need a fire starter. We're going to be making pork butts, so I like to use a remote thermometer with the probe so I can sit inside and fall asleep, and then it will alert me if the temperature starts to fall or climb too high. So while this is beginning to ignite, and that might take about 10 minutes, we're going to go inside and prep our meat. So we have 2 10-pound pork butts, and we're going to prep these today next to our sink on a cutting board by trimming off some of the excess fat, maybe any lymph nodes or any veins that we might find. So you're going to need a nice little flexible knife that's really sharp, a pan to collect the fat, and I like to put a bag in it. It makes it easier to throw away the fat when you're done. We're going to cover the butts with mustard. We're going to put rub on top of that. And again, we're next to the sink so that anything that we need to dump in there, it's right next to us. I like to use vinyl gloves that are powder free. I find that the latex ones tend to rip more, so vinyl's my choice. So let's start with the meat, because that's probably one of the first and most important steps in barbecuing. I'm going to pick bone-in pork butts, usually between 8 and 9 pounds each. This is 2 10.5-pounders that I picked because pork is really cheap right now. But the bone-in is really important. Don't get the boneless. In my opinion, those get really floppy, and it's just not going to go as well for you. I'm also looking for a good amount of fat interdispersed in the meat. I'm looking for a nice tight packaging. I don't want to see too much blood in here. You really don't want this to be aged, I guess. There is such a thing as the money muscle. The money muscle is, in competition, one of the most flavorful parts of the pork butt. And that's right here. You can see all the fat right there. And the fat is the flavor. On this pork butt, you can see the fat all interdispersed there. So this is the money muscle on this pork butt. So on the bottom of your pork butt is the fat cap. I always smoke with the fat cap down, so that's how I'm also going to be trimming it today. I really will not be taking anything off the bottom. So first things first, we're going to just kind of look this over for any lymph nodes, any veins. You can see right here there's a little bit of fat, and that might be a vein. So that's what we're gonna try to trim out before we get smoking. Anything like that that you really don't want someone biting into. So you can see the bone right there. You can also see the bone right here. It's going to be on these ends. Usually the opposite end of the bone is the money muscle right there. So you can see all those little strings of fat. That's the money muscle. And this end I may trim up a little bit so that it gets exposed for the rub to hit it and penetrate. If the rub is not touching the meat, it's more likely to kind of melt off with the fat. And then you lose that rub. The rub really doesn't matter much. You could pick whatever you like. 99% of good barbecue is how you cook it and your attention to the cook, not the rubs, not the marinades, not the brines. That stuff really doesn't matter. Just cook it right. Just like having a good burger. If the burger is overdone, if it's underdone, if the meat wasn't prepared properly, the burger's going to be no good. And it's the same thing with good barbecue. Don't dwell on the flavoring. And I mean by flavoring the rubs and things like that. So overall, this is pretty good. I'm happy with that. You're probably going to lose half of this pork to fat. So at the end, if you start with a 10 pound, you'll probably have somewhere between 4 and 5 pounds of meat at the end. You're also looking for any bone fragments, things like that. I find that sometimes. You'll feel it when you're going around. With pork butts, you're going to have 3 types of meat at the end. You're going to have the crust, which is like the bark, and we're going to build up a bark by using mustard and then putting rub on top of it. And then within it, you're going to have whites and darks. So I like to think of it that way. 3 meats. The bark, whites, and darks. The bark, everyone's going to want to get a piece of that. So it's really important that to build a bark, you put some mustard on, and not too much, but make sure you cover the whole thing. Just lightly, not too heavy, but get in there and cover this whole thing with mustard. Because that mustard, even though it looks yellow and you might think that will come through, it won't. You're never going to see that mustard after a smoke, and you're not going to taste it either. The mustard also helps tenderize the meat too. And then we're just going to put on our rub. I just sprinkle it on all sides except the bottom, lightly. So I don't pat the rub in, I just let it sit like that. And then I do the next side. And then this is the money muscle side. I'm using my favorite rub, which is Three Little Pigs Kansas City Championship. It's from a guy named Chris Marks, who's won a ton of barbecue competitions. I mean, he's won everything. So that's it, just a once over. I don't go too crazy with it. That's it. There's nothing more to it than that. So by the time we're done here, I bet you the fire is ready to be tended to next. So we're going to run back out there and work on the fire. If I finish prepping a little early, I put the meat back in the fridge because cold meat absorbs smoke. So with all the vents open, you always start with them open. Take your chimney, dump your hot coals right on top. Let that get going for about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. So in the middle section here, there's a water pan. That's there to absorb all that energy coming off of the very, very hot fire. That's how you keep temperatures very low in a smoker. So we're going to fill this up 3/4 of the way before we put this middle section on there. That way it's just easier to top it off once it's all together. So I put the middle section on and I cap the smoker, and I will always leave this top vent open all the way. Once the temperature reaches 200 degrees, I'll put the meat on. So right before you put the meat in the smoker, you need to put the wood on and get that smoke to start. That way, every second of your smoke, that meat is getting blasted. At least for the first 2 hours, but don't go past 3 hours. Or else the meat might start to get a little bitter from having too much smoke. So you can see that smoke is starting already. And I like to use cherry wood. It's great for all meats. And I also like to use a sheet pan. It's just easier to get the meat in and out of the smoker, and it also helps protect it from getting blasted by too much heat and burning out your edges. But don't mess around too long. Get this capped up right away. Also, I'm using 3 chunks of wood, and I'm going to turn those chunks after a half an hour. So since we just popped off that lid, the temperature dropped back, but it's going to start to climb back up, and we're basically going to try to keep that needle at 12 o'clock, which is around 220 degrees. That's perfect. And check out that smoke. It's humming. That's exactly what you want to see. You're going to blast this meat with smoke for the first 2 hours. You don't want to go too long, or else it could impart a very bitter flavor. Besides, once meat reaches about 90 degrees, it's no longer going to soak up that smoke flavor anymore. Now, pork butts take about 12 to as much as 14 hours to smoke, and your smoker is only going to last between 6 and 8 hours before you need to reload it with more charcoal. And then I do the same thing and put hot coals on top and refill that water pan. Now, in my case, I got up to 174 degrees and I knew it was done. I'll explain more. Alright, these pork butts look awesome. And one of the ways I can tell that they're done is just by the layer of bark that's on it. It starts to turn black, but it's not going to be burnt. That's exactly what you want. Now, these only measured 174 degrees when I pulled them off. That's low. I usually am looking at between 193 and 195. But they had been on for about 14 hours, so I know they've got to be close to being done. Other ways you can check are the bone. This bone starts to pop out, and it should pull out very easily. That's another indication that it's done. The last thing that I'll look for is the amount of fat. The liquid fat that drains off of these pork butts will fill up in this sheet pan. That's why the pan's convenient, because you can see how much has drained off. So after 6 hours, this was almost full, and then again at 14, it was full again. That's usually about the amount of fat that drains off. We're going to let these rest for 20 minutes, and we're going to need a good pair of insulated gloves to pull this pork. And I like to finish them off with a set of bear claws. Again, you'll need your pan to collect the fat, and I use one of these sheet pans with a lid to put the finished product in. One butt will fill up one of these. So to pull my pork, the very first thing I do is pull out the bone. Because number one, that's going to tell you just how done this meat is. So this bone should pull out pretty easily, and there you go. Nice and easy. We'll get that meat off of there, put it in our pan. Now the way I pull the meat is with my insulated gloves. I just kind of separate it like this, and I'm done. I'm going to go piece by piece and do that looking for any big pieces of fat, and I'll throw the fat away. That's all looks pretty good. These nice chunks of bark, people love that. So you could either separate the bark and put it on one side of the pan so that people can grab a piece of that with their sandwich. But typically people like to have a piece of bark on its own. I usually just put it on one end and then put the whites and the darks in the other side of the pan. And that's it. We're just going to kind of reach in here and just grab off chunks. So you can see this is a dark meat piece, this is a white meat piece. Get a big piece of fat, just kind of pull that off, toss it, and just break this up into nice chunks so people can eat sandwiches or put it on their plate. I don't put any sauce on this, I just stick with the dry rub, but I'll put sauce on the side when we serve it. Now, the bone was on this end right here, so the money muscle is going to be on this side. So let's take a look at that real quick. That's it right there. That's our money muscle. We'll just pull off the fat, big pieces of it. And when you're all done, you can see the smoke ring on that pork. Judges love that in competition. People love that. It just looks really cool. And that's really from the smoke that's penetrating that meat. Anyway, this was great. Please like this video, and thanks for watching.